You ever reach a point where you're just so tired of starting over, you almost forget how it feels to hope for something new? That was me rolling into Bitter Creek Saddle, sore and dead broke the air thick with that September heat, like even the dust was tired of hanging around. I'd burned through what little luck I had left, and all I owned in this world fit in the pockets of a coat that didn't keep out the cold anymore. You want a hook? Here's one. I took a job every man in town swore was cursed, figured, what's one more bad decision? Folks in Bitter Creek had plenty to say about Black Hollow Ranch and its owner Eleanor St. James, a widow with a reputation for chewing up ranch hands and spitting them out before payday. I'd heard stories, men who left after a week, others who vanished, some blaming ghosts, some blaming the boss. Truth was, desperation doesn't care about rumors, and the way my stomach was grumbling, I would have worked for the devil if he'd offered breakfast and a roof. So when Eleanor herself handed me the job, I shook her hand and never looked back. First sight of that ranch I'll never forget. The iron gates, once black as midnight, were now rusted and hanging crooked cottonwoods, whispering in the breeze, and beyond them a house so grand it looked out of place, a relic from when fortunes were measured in cattle and not in debt. But even from the road you could see the scars, shutters flapping, loose paint peeling like old sunburn, and a silence so heavy it pressed on your chest. Eleanor met me on the porch, tall, proud, silver in her hair. Grief and grit sharing space behind those gray eyes. She didn't waste words. "You must be Avery," she called, her voice so crisp it almost hurt. I tipped my hat, told her I was a man of my word, and for a moment I saw something soften behind her sternness. Maybe hope, maybe just exhaustion. Pete, her right-hand man, showed me to the bunkhouse, giving me the lay of the land. The main barn solid as a bank vault. The equipment shed full of rusted bones from better days. Cattle scattered thin as rumors across hills that used to be fat with promise. As we walked, I asked Pete how long he'd been at Black Hollow. Long enough to know this place used to be something special, he said, and long enough to see it nearly broken. That's when I learned about the fire, the one that took Eleanor's husband and son, the one that left her holding a ranch, and a sadness most men run from. That first supper in the big house was a quiet affair. Sarah, the housekeeper, tried to fill the emptiness with good stew and soft conversation. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, eating little, her gold chain glinting as she ran through a list of chores that would outlast the sun. She wanted fences fixed, cattle rounded up, hay cut. The desperation in her voice was a tune I knew by heart. I'd sung it myself more than once. After dinner, I wandered the grounds, trying to get a feel for a place that felt both hollow and haunted, but not by ghosts, by love, by memory, by all the things that used to be. That night, I spotted Eleanor in the moonlight, walking toward a stand of charred trees, moving with a kind of determination that said she did this often. She knelt among the ashes of a burned-out cabin, whispering apologies to the dead, her grief spilling out into the night. I should have turned away, but I stayed drawn to her pain like a moth to flame. She caught me watching, called me out. "You might as well come out," she said, voice raw but steady. I apologized for intruding, said I was worried for her safety. She let me see her grief, told me about the fire, how she'd tried to save them, how the weight of that failure still clung to her like smoke. I told her what I knew, that carrying the dead is different from letting them drag you under. "Maybe you're not supposed to let them go," I said. "Maybe you just carry them different." And for a second, I think she believed me. The days blurred into a rhythm of honest work. Fences went up, straight gates swung true, and the machinery started to sound less like dying animals and more like a working ranch again. Pete kept me busy telling stories about the old Colonel St. James and how he built this spread from nothing. And always the shadow of the fire of lost loved ones hung between all of us. But something else started to happen, a shift so small you'd miss it if you weren't looking for it. Eleanor began to watch me work sometimes, even smiled when she thought I wasn't looking. And one afternoon, while we patched up a stubborn water pump, she asked about my past. I gave her the truth, cavalryman court-martialed for refusing to follow an order that would have meant slaughtering innocent people. Not the sort of thing that lands you in history books, I joked, but she didn't laugh. She looked at me like maybe being broken wasn't the worst thing a man could be. Then came the twist. Holbrook and his slick developers rolled up in their fancy carriage, tossing out threats thinly disguised as advice. Offered Eleanor a pile of money to walk away. When she refused, they let slip that accidents can happen on a lonely ranch. What they didn't count on was two people too stubborn or maybe too desperate to back down. A week later, Eleanor and I dug through old land records and found the key mineral rights granted generations back. Turns out the land was worth 10 times more than the developers offered. If you believe the geological surveys, there was copper enough under Black Hollow to turn the valley into a mining boomtown. We checked with old Samuel Morrison, the lawyer who confirmed it. Suddenly, the attacks made sense. Cut fences, dead cattle, busted water lines. This was no scare tactic. It was psychological warfare designed to force a sale or prove Eleanor unfit to run the place. The real gut punch, Webb, my old commanding officer, was behind the hired muscle. He'd been brought in not just to intimidate, but to use my past against us in court, painting me as a coward and a traitor. They forged deeds planned to have Eleanor declared incompetent and started making their move while the sheriff was out of town. When they killed 3 head of cattle and left tracks leading north, I tracked them. Found a camp of gunmen and evidence that the whole operation was more organized than any outlaw gang I'd ever seen. I brought the proof back to Eleanor and for the first time told her everything about Dakota, about the dead men under my command, about how I'd carried that shame every day since. She didn't turn away. She said, "You chose conscience over convenience. That's not failure. That's honor." We knew what was coming. The night before the showdown, Eleanor sent a telegram to Colonel Morrison asking for help for the truth to come out. The next night, Webb and his men surrounded the ranch, guns out, threats flying. I told Eleanor to stay inside. She refused. "Our future," she said, "not just yours." We prepared side by side, ready to defend what mattered. Webb tried to bait me, called me a coward, said I was hiding behind a widow's skirt, but Eleanor wasn't having it. She raised her father's rifle and stood her ground. When Webb's men pushed forward, the night exploded with gunfire. We held them off as best we could, bullets splintering wood, fear and adrenaline running through us like wildfire. Just as things were about to go south, salvation came thundering up the hill. Colonel Morrison and a squad of cavalry answering that telegram. Webb and his mercenaries never stood a chance. Morrison read out the truth for all to hear. I'd been court-martialed for doing the right thing. The mineral rights fraud was exposed. The supposed copper was just a scam. Webb was arrested, the developer's scheme unraveled, and Black Hollow Ranch was safe at last. 6 months later, the ranch thrived. The gates painted cattle fat, the main house echoing with laughter instead of loss. Eleanor traded her black dress for blue, and together we planned for a future neither of us thought we'd get. She showed me her locket, inside photos of her husband and son, and now a new one of us taken the day we won our freedom. I gave her my father's silver dollar, the one I'd carried through war, disgrace, and doubt. Told her I finally understood what it meant. You measure a man not by what he owns, but by what he's willing to risk for love, truth, and the hope of home. I asked her to marry me right there at the fence, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. We got married under the big sky with friends old and new. The brand on the cattle now joined her family's mark and mine. And as we watched another sunset burn across the Montana hills, I knew this was our reward, not just survival, but a life built together out of sorrow and courage and second chances. Now, maybe you think stories like this end with a perfect peace, but let me ask you, would you have done the same? Would you have stayed and fought for a place, for a person, when every instinct screamed to run? Or is justice only real when someone is willing to risk everything for it? Let me know what you'd have done. Tell me what you think is worth fighting for, and if you've ever found your way home even when you least expected it.
Xin chào các bạn, mình là Trinh, mình phụ trách viết content. Trên đây là những công việc của mình là mình
vamos supor, ele falou um negócio sério.
It is cold, yeah.
Next one? Alright. Thank you, man. Hey, if you guys have any trouble, let somebody know. Please.
After the tree to hold on to.
Yeah, they're